Our next objective says determine the factors of a polynomial by applying the remainder theorem. Okay. If we tried to factor this with the only way that we know how to factor something that has 4 terms, which would be factoring by grouping. I'm not going to do it here for you, but even if you set up your 2 groups, pull out a GCF, you're not going to be able to factor that based on what we know now. Okay? So we're going to have to use the remainder theorem, and we're going to have to use synthetic division to help us basically get a factor and then get to something that we can factor the rest of. Okay? And really that all comes from this information right here. Okay? This number in the parentheses does 2 things for us. Okay? So the number in the parentheses does 2 things. The first thing it does is it actually gives us one of the factors of this polynomial, okay, without doing really much work at all, okay? If f of -3, so if f of any number is 0, okay, then x minus a is a factor. Okay? And since there's a minus a here, we're always going to take the opposite of this guy for our factor. Okay? So the first thing that this does is, I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom here, and the factors, one of the factors will be x plus 3. And I suggest you doing that right away in your problem, because you don't know how many times I graded Algebra II tests in this unit, and at the end of the day, there is no x plus 3 there. The other factors are there, but we forget that we should start this problem by determining one factor from this information given here. Okay? So I would come down here and do that right away. Now the next thing that it does, okay, is it tells us what number to put in the box for our synthetic division. Okay? It actually gives us the exact number. So we're going to put that -3 in our box for our synthetic division. Okay, think about it. If our factor was x plus 3, or there was an x plus 3 on the bottom here, wouldn't we take the opposite of this, -3? Okay. If you're just looking in the parentheses, it's going to be the exact same as that number. All right? Cool. And what we're going to do is synthetic divide, okay? Based on a previous objective, you should know what's going to happen at the end of this synthetic division. And we're going to see here right now. We put our coefficients next to the box here. Okay, let's go through the process. 1, -3, 2, -6, +24, and a 0. Well, I'm hoping you knew that was going to happen, because our last objective talked about how if x plus 3 was a factor, when I put a -3 in the box, I should get a 0. That was our test in that previous objective to figure out which of the multiple choice options we were given was a factor. All right, so we're just using them. Now, let's figure out what we have left. All right, so we basically divided this by one of the factors by putting a -3 in the box. It was a 3rd degree, so we start off after dividing with our 2nd degree, our x, our constant. Technically, this would be our remainder, but there is none. Okay. So what we have remaining is x squared plus 2x minus 8. All right. And the second thing that we have to do, okay, so I guess we should start putting down what we need to do here. The number in the parentheses gives us those 2 things. All right, we can call that step 1 if we really wish. Our second step would be to synthetic divide. And we're going to put in parentheses maybe twice. All right, we might have to synthetic divide twice. You're going to see that in our next example. Okay? And then the last step, the third step, is to factor the trinomial that remains. Okay, so we're just going to factor this guy. And for the purpose of Objective 10, you're going to hopefully see pretty easy trinomials to factor, something that we don't have to slide and divide, just this 1x squared here. So we figure out what multiplies to be -8 and what adds up to +2. Those numbers would be 4 and -2. So, alongside of this factor, my other two factors will be x plus 4, x minus 2. And that is how this factors. Okay? If you tried to use grouping, wouldn't work. Okay, this is really the only way to do it, as long as they give us that first factor. Okay? Cool. Let's move on to the second one, the second example here. All right, we're going to change the polynomial around. They're going to give us some new information. You're going to see they're going to give us actually two of the factors. All right. So let's see what it says. Factor the polynomial. I'll write a little small here. X to the 4th plus x to the 3rd minus 75x squared plus 63x plus 810. Given f of 5 equals 0 and f of 6 equals 0 for that polynomial. Okay, so you'll notice that they gave us two zeros. They said f of 5 equals 0 and f of 6 equals 0. So it says the number in the parentheses does two things. In this case, the two numbers each do something. Okay. That first one, the f of 5 equals 0, tells me that one of my factors is going to be x minus 5. And the second one tells me that one of my factors is going to be x minus 6. And then we'll do our synthetic division and figure out what the remaining two factors are. So let's synthetic divide. What we're going to have to do is synthetic divide twice. Once with a 5 in the box and once with a 6 in the box. Okay? And it doesn't matter which one you start with. It could be either one. I'll just choose the 6 because it's the closest one. I'll put a 6 in the box. 1, 1, negative 75, 63, and 8, 10. Okay? Bring down the 1. 6. 1 plus 6 is 7. We get a 42. We get a negative 33. 6 times negative 33 is negative 198. 63 plus negative 198 is negative 135. And I'm hoping that 6 times negative 135 is negative 810 because it should give me a 0 here, and it is. That's what should happen if x minus 6 is a factor. Okay? So these objectives kind of all link together in terms of what these things mean. Now, my suggestion for you is so you don't have to use more work and more space than you need to. Okay? We're going to then synthetic divide what we have here by our next number, in this case a 5. So I'm just going to come right here and put a 5 in that box. I get a 1, I get a 5, I get a 12, I get a 60, I get a 27, and I get a positive 135, which gets me a 0. It should be a 0, because again, x minus 5 is a factor. All right, we started with an x to the 4th. We synthetic divided once. We synthetic divided again. So this is going to be our x squared, and our x, and our constant. We don't have a remainder. X squared plus 12x plus 27. We've factored things like that pretty much since semester 1. What two numbers multiply to be 27 and add up to 12? We get a 9 and 3. So our last two factors, x plus 9 and x plus 3. And this is our answer there. Cool? All right. We'll do one practice if you want. I'd suggest kind of pausing this one and then work that one out yourself. And then get this video going again and we'll see how you guys did. All right, this time we're factoring x to the third minus 2x squared minus 16x plus 32 given f of 2 equals 0. All right, that number in the box gives us, or in the parentheses, gives us two things. It tells us that in this case x minus 2 is our first factor, opposite of that number. Take this number and put it in the box. Our coefficients are 1, negative 2, negative 16, positive 32. We bring down the 1, 2 times 1 is 2, 0, 2 times 0 is 0, negative 16, 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. When we add those together, we get no remainder, which is good. Now, when interesting things happened here, we ended up with a 0. All right? We started with a third power, we synthetic divided once. So we get x squared, that's how many x's I have. Here's my constant. There's my remainder, but I don't have a remainder. So when we put this all together, we're going to get 1x squared. We don't have any x's, minus 16. We might want to change our notes then. Factor the trinomial that remains. Okay. Or maybe it's not a trinomial at all. I'm hoping we know how to factor this. There's a specific case that we call this. We have a perfect square, and a minus sign, or maybe it's the difference of squares. All right. This is the difference of squares. Remember how we factor the difference of squares? We take the square root of the first term, and it goes in our first spots. We take the square root of the second term, it goes in our second spots, and we just remember that a plus and a minus go between them. All right, let's call it a day for this objective.